Paradigm lost. America's dance with the devil.
Great pleasure for Mrs. Kennedy and myself to welcome the Black Watch to the White House. We are proud to do so for many reasons. The United States, in fact, all of us love, I suppose, in a sense, lost causes, and on occasion the history of Scotland has been a lost cause, but in some ways they have triumphed, perhaps more today than ever before. So we're glad to have you here, Major, and we regard it as a great honor to have the representatives of a great country here as our guests at the White House. Thank you.
It has an engraving on the blades. Huh? It's an officer's dirk.
What is the motto of the regiment?
Nobody wounds us with impunity, sir.
I want to thank Major for this presentation of a dirk of the Black Watch. The Major just said that the motto of the Black Watch is, nobody wounds us with impunity. I think that's a very good motto for some of the rest of us. Thank you. Thank you, Major.
On November 22nd, I can still remember the moment in time when my own paradigm of reality began to unravel. All the teachers in my elementary school gathered in the hallway, crying a sea of tears as they learned the fate of our president, John Fitzgerald Kennedy. When my father arrived home from work that day and told my mother with a smile on his face that Kennedy had gotten what he deserved, a fissure began to appear in my worldview. My father had grown up on the south side of Chicago with a gun range in his basement. My grandfather encouraged my father to practice nightly as he warned him about the Roosevelt administration's communist agenda. When I was accepted to Harvard, my grandparents warned my parents that their son had been lost to the communists. In many ways, Paradigm Lost, America's Dance with the Devil, is about my personal journey, my personal paradigm change as I sought to bring meaning to a worldview that was suddenly filled with contradictions. In the spring of 2013, Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren testified eloquently in the Senate Finance Committee hearings about the involvement of too-big-to-fail banks in laundering drug money. This was an excellent start to a discussion that left the American media landscape at the end of the Iran-Contra scandal. However, if we are truly serious in addressing the issue of the international narcotics trade and the effects this trade has had on our inner city, we must understand our own history and what I like to call America's dirty little secret. U.S. government officials have been actively involved in the international narcotics trade since the middle of the 1950s. Paradigm Lost, America's Dance with the Devil, follows the money trail from Southeast Asia through the Watergate era, when heroin was the drug of choice, and into the Reagan era, Iran-Contra, when a cocaine epidemic turned our inner city streets into war zones. According to a recent retired employee of the Central Intelligence Agency, the CIA has distributed more than $7 trillion worth of illegal drugs since the end of the Vietnam War. If illegal drugs were being used deliberately as a weapon of mass destruction against poor whites and blacks, should not the fines collected be used specifically to repair the damage done by this illegal trade in our inner cities? The history of this issue also speaks to how to solve the crisis of drugs, crime, and violence that plague our society. If we know the truth will set us free. As early as the 1870s, drug abuse began to evolve into a weapon of fear capable of determining the outcome of elections in the United States. The abolitionist movement that had succeeded in abolishing slavery now turned its attention to abolishing the twin evils of alcohol and drugs. As this movement gained strength at the beginning of the 20th century, three core principles: Christian values, conservative politics as represented by the interests of big business, and a scientific outlook based on evolution and eugenics became the philosophical framework of this new paradigm of American reality. How a scientific outlook, which rejected God and consciousness, became wedded to a Christian political movement funded by big business is the story of how addiction became the American disease. It is also the story of how the 1% sought to focus the public's attention on the individual shortcomings of man, his individual sins, instead of the inherent inequalities brought on by the Industrial Revolution. This new military-industrial complex paradigm of reality began to have a major impact on our conceptions of human morality at the beginning of the 20th century. The moral paradigm through which the typical American views the world around him began to be carefully crafted. It is this paradigm of reality that keeps Americans in submission. The the corporate military paradigm of reality is the root cause of the majority of the problems that face our nation today. And it is nearly impossible to comprehend the philosophical and moral failures of the United States war on terror or the current disaster in the Middle East without first understanding the misuse of the science that was used to mold the military-industrial complex's paradigm of reality. It is the premise of this book that the psychological warfare program used by Hitler's Nazi Germany was copied by the information gurus of the U.S. military-industrial complex to mislead the American public about the true nature of the beast. Until we understand how this psychological warfare campaign damaged the American psyche, can we hope to solve the current crisis in Washington, D.C. But perhaps the most serious mistake of the Church Committee was not investigating the fact that the military-industrial program had a complete research program designed to learn how to control culture. In 1980, Paul Valley and Michael Aquino, the United States Army Department of Psychological Warfare, delivered a paper that would shape our country's destiny for the next 30 years. The Psychology of Victory from Psychops to Mind War was a declaration of war against the American public. As Aquino states, mind war is the deliberate, aggressive convincing of all participants in a war that we will win that war. This was a vision for all Americans to be conditioned to accept moral standards as seen from military leaders' eyes and to convince the public that war, any war supported by our military leaders, was a just and necessary war. Mind war was and is an Alice in Wonderland style tea party where the drug of choice is electronic. At the end of the Vietnam War, the U.S. military became convinced that their defeat in Vietnam was due to two things: bad coverage in the press and the anti-war movement. Mind war was a response to this loss. In reality, the military psychological warfare program to encourage a culture based on the philosophy that war was of supreme importance to the survival of the United States. And it is this psychological warfare program that has led to the destruction of the American dream and has permanently damaged our reputation as a world leader. It has also left the American economy in free fall and a complete shambles. Once you understand that the heroin trade was the payoff for the Kennedy assassination, understanding how the history of the 1970s unfolded is much easier. Military planners not only reaped huge profits from their distribution of narcotics, but they also used heroin to disrupt the civil rights movement and the anti-war movements by creating chaos in America's inner cities. Paradigm Lost, America's Dance with the Devil, explores how the U.S. government became involved in the narcotics trade and how the issue of drug use and abuse slowly became a weapon capable of changing the course of elections. After learning the facts, I'm sure you will agree that our paradigm is lost, and only by asking the hard questions can we hope to solve a problem that has plagued American society since the end of the Civil War, a problem that by some estimates now costs American society more than $500 billion per year. I know you will not be disappointed when you learn the entire story of America's Dance with the Devil and how we lost our paradigm of reality. Paradigm Lost, America's Dance with the Devil sheds new light on a century of history. Be blessed, and thank you to everyone for your support.